everybody. What is up and welcome back, my friends. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and I'm just a creepy person that likes to talk about murder. Today is another two-part. We're going to be talking about the Alphabet Murders. We are going to be talking about the New York Alphabet Murders first, and in part two, we'll be talking about the California Alphabet Murders. Fun, right? So, this is also known as the double initial murders because each one of these victims has the initial of the first name is the same as the initial of the last name. So all of these victims were girls aged 10 or 11, and their surnames began with the same letter of their first names, basically, double initials. Now, these crimes happened between 1971 to 1973 in Rochester, New York. If you don't know where Rochester, New York is, it's about like I want to say like 25 to 45-minute ride from Niagara Falls. If you have never been there, it's definitely interesting there. I will say that. I have gone to New York quite a few times. So each victim in this case had been sexually assaulted. They had been murdered either by manual or ligature strangulation. This is before their body was discarded in or near a town or village near Rochester with a name beginning with the same letter of each victim's name. So that's what makes it kind of like more intriguing, I guess. So, yes, our first victim in this case is a girl named Carmen Colon. Now, at about 4:20 p.m. on November 16th of 1971, the 10-year-old girl named Carmen Colon disappeared while returning home from an errand in Rochester. An eyewitness stated that she entered a pharmacy. Her grandmother instructed her to visit on West Main Street, but she left the store after learning the prescription she was instructed to collect wasn't processed yet, and informed the store owner, whose name is Jack Corbin, I gotta go. She was then observed entering a car parked close by the pharmacy. She was then reported missing to RPD at 7:50 p.m. Approximately 50 minutes after she exited the pharmacy, a ton of different motorists on Interstate 490 observed a child naked from the waist down running from a reversing vehicle believed to be a dark-colored Ford Pinto hatchback. She was waving her arms frantically and shouting in an attempt to flag down a passing vehicle. And at least one of these witnesses observed Carmen being led back to the vehicle by her abductor. About 2 days later, two teenage boys discovered her partially nude body in a gully not far from Interstate 490, and it's close to the village of Churchville. This is located about 12 miles from where Carmen was last seen alive. Her coat was discovered in a culvert. If you don't know what a culvert is, basically it's a giant pipe underneath a walkway, a road, or like a bridge that allows water to go through. And this was about 300 feet from her body. Her trousers were only discovered on November 30th, so quite a little bit after she disappeared. Her trousers were discovered close to a service road near where multiple motorists had observed seeing her attempting to escape her abductor. Her autopsy revealed that she had been raped. She suffered a fracture to her skull, one of her vertebrae, before she was manually strangled to death, and her body had been extensively scratched by fingernails. So whoever did this to her really, really fought with her, and she fought to try and get away. So both the murder of her and the fact that no one who observed her trying to flee her abductor had attempted to offer her help. This generated such an intense public outrage. The two New York newspapers at the time, the Times-Union and the Democrat and Chronicle, offered a combined reward of $2,500 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of her murderer. And all of the information each publication received was then relayed to police. There was a numerous amount of local businesses and residents that added private donations to help the reward fund, which would end up making the sum of this to exceed about 6 grand. Although police interrogated several people in the months following her murder, all of them were cleared of involvement, and by December 21st, the case, the investigators assigned to this case on a full-time basis was decreased to 3. So in early 1972, 5 large billboards were erected alongside the expressways, and it had her picture on it. Do you know who killed Carmen Colon? And basically just like how to get in touch with them. And each of them talked about the reward money and the hotline number that was attached to the case. Now, each established the previous November to encourage the public to submit anonymous information. Although this tactic generated some new leads, it failed to there was nothing that came of it. And her case went cold. Now, we wouldn't have another murder until the following year. Now, the next murder is that of Wanda Walkowicz. This happened 17 months later, and about approximately 5 p.m. on April 2nd of 1972, 11-year-old Wanda disappeared from the east side of Rochester while returning home from an errand. Now, according to the delicatessen that she went to, after she was instructed to visit, where she purchased groceries that she was instructed to buy at about 5:15, she had begun walking alone down Conkey Ave, and this is where she was last seen. And her mother, Joyce, reported her missing at 8 p.m. that night. Now, the police immediately launched an intense search to locate Wanda, and about 50 detectives searched the terrain around her home and the delicatessen and around the Genesee River, where she was known to play. And all of these searches failed to locate her. And even though several neighborhood residents recall seeing her struggling to carry a bag of groceries walking north of Avenue B. There was also 3 classmates that specifically observed Wanda bracing a bag against a fence so she could improve her grip on the bag as a brown vehicle drove past her. Now, Wanda's fully clothed body would be discovered by a police officer at 10:15 a.m. the following day. She was discarded at the base of the hillside alongside an access road on Route 104 in Webster. This is about 7 miles from Rochester. Now, the position her body was in indicated that she was thrown from a moving vehicle and her body had rolled down the embankment. Her autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted, and then she was strangled from behind with a ligature, which they think it more than likely is a belt. She also suffered several defensive wounds that indicated that she fought her murderer. In addition, her body had been redressed after she died, and the autopsy also revealed traces of semen and pubic hair on her body. There was also a few strands of white cat fur found on her body, even though Wanda's family didn't have a pet with this fur color. So, just like with the case of Carmen Colon, they established an anonymous telephone line. They distributed flyers throughout Rochester and had a reward for about $10,000 with any information that would lead to an arrest and conviction of Wanda's murderer. So, police would inquire about eyewitness statements that were taken the day that she went missing as she walked home from the delicatessen on April 2nd. Now, they observed a child standing alongside the passenger side of a brown vehicle, conversing with the driver. And the eyewitness was unable to obtain a clear view of the person in the vehicle, although the location and sighting is about 0.2 of a mile away from Wanda's house. Another vehicle who contacted investigators following all of the hotline and stuff, she informed them that she saw Wanda being She saw Wanda being forced into a light-colored Dodge Dart on Conkey Ave between 5:30 and 6 p.m. on the evening of her disappearance. And this is where they really are like, whoa, because Wanda has red hair and she sees a man forcing a redheaded child, matching Wanda's description, into this vehicle. Now, police initially would dismiss any suggestion of a link between Wanda and Carmen, although the sheriff's sergeant who had been assigned to investigate Carmen's murder, which by this time it was a largely inactive case, was reassigned to help the task force to investigate the murder of Wanda. Now, in September of 1973, the local network on TV, WOKR, announced plans to broadcast a televised reconstruction of Wanda's abduction and recovery of her body. This was about a 30-minute episode that was broadcasted on the 21st of October. And accompanied by this was public appeals of witnesses for witnesses to contact authorities. Although this program resulted in over 200 calls to RPD, none of these leads were useful. So, about 7 months after Wanda's murder, on the evening of November 26th of 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Mainza, was reported missing by her mother Carolyn after she failed to return home from school. The subsequent investigation would determine that Michelle was last seen by her classmates at around 3:20 p.m. She was walking alone en route to a shopping plaza located close to her school with an intention of retrieving a purse her mother had left in the store within the plaza earlier that day. Now, about 10 minutes later, a witness observed Michelle sitting in the passenger side of a beige or tan vehicle traveling at a high speed on Ackerman Street before turning onto Webster Ave. According to the witness, this child was weeping. If you don't know what weeping is, they were crying. At about 5:30 p.m. on November 26th, the motorist observed a man standing by a large beige or tan vehicle with a flat tire. This person was parked alongside of Route 350 in the town of Walworth, holding a girl he strongly believed to be Michelle Mainza by the wrist. When the motorist stopped to offer assistance, the individual had deliberately grabbed the girl and pushed her behind his back. And also, this helped obscure the license plate from the motorist's view. And as the motorist stared in the direction, now, the way that the guy was staring at the man that tried to stop and help him was that of like a menacing expression, and the motorist felt like really creeped out and drove away. So Michelle's body would be found at 10:30 a.m. on November 28th, about 2 days later. She was fully clothed. She was found lying face down in a ditch alongside a rural road in Macedon. This was approximately 15 miles from Rochester. Her autopsy revealed that in addition to receiving extensive blunt force trauma to her body, she had been raped and strangled to death from behind by a ligature, possibly a thin rope. Now, there were numerous strands of white cat fur that were discovered upon her clothing, and leaf samples from the foliage matched the foliage in the area where her body was discovered. The foliage was found in her clenched hands. So this indicated that she had been likely strangled to death at or near the location where she was found. And investigators were able to retrieve a palm print from her neck and traces of semen on her body and underwear. A forensic analysis of the semen determined that she had been raped by one person. So they also analyzed the contents of her stomach, and it revealed that she had a hamburger with onions that was consumed approximately an hour before her murder. So this gave kind of credit to the earlier reports of a girl matching Michelle's description, having been seen in the company of a Caucasian male with dark hair. and he would be aged between 25 to 35, approximately 6 feet in height, and weighing about 165. And both were at a fast food restaurant in Penfield at approximately 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of her disappearance. This is alongside Route 350, approximately 1 hour later. So, if he broke down, that makes sense if they walk somewhere to eat. Now, each of these girls were laid to rest at the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Rochester. Carmen's funeral was on November 22nd of 1971. Her funeral had about 200 people in attendance. Wanda was laid to rest on April 6th of 1973. She was laid to rest in a small white and gold casket following a service that was officiated by Reverend Benedict Amen. And Michelle's funeral was held at Corpus Christi Church on December 1st of 1973. She had an open casket service that was attended by tons of people. So, at the conclusion of Michelle's funeral service, her father, Christopher, stated to the other mourners she was a sweet little girl and she didn't fight much. So, the investigation into this case generated such a public outrage that nothing was being done and nobody could figure out who did this. And especially following Michelle's murder, where they had a composite drawing of the individual seen with her by numerous witnesses that was given to the media. They also installed a telephone hotline that exclusively devoted to the manhunt for the perpetrator, whom they strongly suspected had committed all 3 murders. So it took Michelle's murder for them to finally realize that, oh, hey, all 3 of these are probably connected to one another. Which it's really sad, but sometimes that's what it takes. Now, the similarities in this case is all 3 were pre-adolescent females who disappeared from Rochester in the early afternoon on days of light or heavy rain. All 3 whose bodies were later discovered in nearby towns where the town's names started with the first letter of their name. The body of each girl had either been discovered fully clothed or partially clothed close to an expressway or at a location that was accessible by a vehicle. Each victim had been evidently thrown from or carried from a car to the location where her body had been discarded. Each girl was short in height. All 3 were raped and strangled to death. And all 3 were known to be viewed as somewhat lonely outcasts by their peers. Furthermore, the stomach contents of both Wanda and Michelle revealed that the girls ingested food shortly before their death, which neither girl is known to have eaten prior to her disappearance. So, and both of these girls were redressed after death. So it's possible that Carmen was victim number 1 for this person. And typically after you have your first victim, that's when they really try and change their MO. So that's possibly what could have happened, is that whoever did this really was like, hey, I gotta change it up. So both contemporary and current investigators in this case stated that the possibility of each victim was selected due to the double initials of her name is extremely unlikely, because how are you going to know what their names are? And as for an offender of this case, to pre-select his victims for that reason would likely involve in him stalking his victim over a period of time, thus increasing the risk of him being noticed. So they were really like, huh, how do we connect these? They all have similarities, but how would they know that all of them have a double initial? You know what I mean? So some investigators feel like the murders of Wanda and Michelle may have been committed by the same person who had lured the girls to their death, but the overall MO of the murder of Carmen strongly indicates that her murder had been committed by an individual that knew or was possibly related to her, and she was abducted by force. Either way, all of them were abducted by force. There is a few suspects in this case. One is Miguel Colon, which is Carmen's uncle. They thought that he was involved in her case, but there was no physical evidence that linked him to the murder, even though there was strong circumstantial evidence that could have possibly gotten a guilty verdict. But we will never know because Miguel committed suicide in 1991 at the age of 94, and this is after an incident of domestic violence where he both shot and wounded his wife and his brother. We have 3 more suspects in this case. One is Dennis Termini. Now, he was a strong suspect in the Alphabet murder. He was a firefighter in Rochester at the time, and he is known as the garage rapist in Rochester, and he committed a minimum of 14 rapes of teenage girls and young women between 1971 and 1973, which are kind of the years that these fall in line with. He is also known to have a beige vehicle, matching the description of the vehicle observed by several eyewitnesses. So, about 5 weeks after the death of Michelle, on January 1st of 1974, about 5 weeks after the death of Michelle, this is when Dennis was known to have attempted to abduct a teenage girl at gunpoint, and although he fled the scene where the teenager refused to cease screaming, he was then pursued by police, but he ended up committing suicide by shooting himself in the head. They did reveal that his vehicle did have traces of white cat fur upon the upholstery. Now, they did exhume his body in 2007 to compare his DNA to that of the semen samples that were collected from Wanda's body. This resulted in that the test confirmed that he was not responsible for her murder. However, there's no physical evidence retrieved from Carmen or Michelle's body that exists for the comparison of Dennis. So, our 3rd out of 4 is Kenneth Bianchi. Now, he is another suspect in the murders, and he is also a serial killer. Now, I know, fun, right? I have another one too that's a serial killer, which we're going to be talking about in our next one. But he, at the time of the murder, worked as an ice cream vendor in Rochester, and he was known to work at locations close to the first 2 murders. Bianchi had relocated to Rochester to LA. So, yeah, Bianchi relocated from Rochester to LA in January of 1976, and now between 77 and 78, him and his cousin, Angelo Buono Jr., committed the Hillside Strangler murders of 10 girls and young women between the ages of 12 and 28. Bianchi was never charged with the Alphabet murders and denied any relation to them. He also has repeatedly attempted to have investigators clear him of suspicion. However, while he resided in Rochester, he was known to have driven a vehicle of the same color and model of the vehicle seen near the abduction sites. Now, on to the fun one. Joseph Nasso. He is involved in basically our next case. So, in April of 2011, now he was 77 years old at the time, he was arrested in Reno, Nevada for the murders of 4 women in California committed between 77 and 94, all of whom were prostitutes. All of them, their surnames began with the same letter of their first names. Now, Joseph was a New York native, and he had lived in Rochester in the early 70s and was known to travel regularly between New York and California. So he was initially described to authorities as a person of interest in the Alphabet murders. And also DNA testing confirmed that his DNA did not match the semen samples recovered of the bodies of Wanda. Now, he was charged and brought to trial in the death of the 4 women in California, and that is the Alphabet murders in California. And that is part 2 of this that we will be discussing tomorrow. And I'll get more into him as well. Now, he was obviously but yeah. So that, my friends, is the case of the Alphabet murders. In Rochester, New York. And stay tuned for part 2 when it comes to the Alphabet murders of California. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.